Hello, my name is Linda. I love to papercraft, art journal, and design printables. Today I wanted to show you how to make a journal, a junk journal style notebook made with a leather cover, cardstock lining, and various magazine and pattern papers inside. So for the cover of my journal, I'm using a scrap piece of black leather. It's pretty thick and sturdy, and I glued a pretty pattern paper on the inside to reinforce and just make the inside lining more pretty. So I always glue these covers beforehand because it takes a while to glue the pieces together and let them dry at least overnight, if not longer. Usually my pattern piece of paper is cut to the size of the journal that I want, so I just glue it on the leather piece and I'm going to trim it once everything is dried and I'm ready to put it together. So now I'm going to go ahead and pick out papers that I like that seem to go together so I can use them as the pages of my junk journal. And I say junk journal because it's a journal that doesn't have white pages in it to begin with. Instead, it's going to have a mix of paper that I have lying around or pretty pattern papers in a particular theme or style. I think junk journaling is a really great way to start journaling if you're not already doing it yourself, because the pages already have something on them for you to react to rather than a totally blank page. So the origin of junk journals really had like junk mail or undesirable type of papers in it. But I like to curate my pages, so I like to really think about what I want in it because I'm using them literally as the background of my journal pages, so something to start with. I'm not necessarily going to cover them up with paint or gesso because I'm more of like a collage, paper, printables, that kind of thing, kind of journaler, rather than the sort of mixed media side of things where you might cover everything up with gesso first or paint over it, which means it wouldn't matter as much like what kind of background you have. So I'm looking through my old issues of Flow magazine and just papers that I have in my stash, and I'm going through and trying to pick the ones that I like that also seem to go together in terms of color scheme or subject. This journal that I'm making right now is A6 in size, so it's pretty small. It's like a pocket notebook, and I want to use it to create pages all about my sort of love-hate relationship with coffee. So for this themed journal, I really want to pick papers that I think will work together and will work with this theme that I'm working on, rather than being like really random about it. So when you're picking your papers, remember that you can crop your pages to include just the parts that you like. Especially when it's a smaller journal like this, you're not using the whole piece of paper. So take your time to look through everything and curate exactly what it is you want your pages to be. And of course, this can be nerve-wracking if you're not really sure what you're going to create. But if you're like me and you have a particular theme that you're working on, you might want to choose specific imagery. So that's what I'm doing. Remember that you can also turn your pages on the side. You don't necessarily have to use them the way that they are presented, like in a magazine or a book. Especially when it comes to text or copy writing that is on pages pre-printed, if you turn them to their side, then it's going to turn into more of a design element or texture on the page rather than something you're supposed to read, like in a traditional book or magazine. So when I decided on an A6 size journal, I had measured out my cover with just a bit of extra room all around to give myself more space. And I knew that it was going to be a small journal, so only one signature. And when I say signature, I mean that's the stack of paper that I'm sewing into the journal itself. Each sort of folded stack is called a signature. And I'm not going to fold multiple groups because I'm just making one. And the reason is because I had measured out everything out so that it would really only fit one stack of paper. So whatever size of journal that you're deciding on, and depending how many pages you want to include, you need to make sure you account for that in the size of your journal cover. So it's either going to be just double the size of whatever your journal is so that there's a front and back, and just one stack of paper in. If you wanted to include more sets of paper, more signatures, then you need to make sure you add in like the binding, the spine of the journal so that it's bigger and everything fits. But of course the simplest is just to start with one signature, and you probably don't want to include more than like 10 or 12 pages, depending on the thickness of your papers, of course, when you fold them, because as you fold them the edges are going to fan out, and you can definitely trim on the right hand side, but it's going to get sort of like fatter and fatter, which might cause problems when you're sewing it all together. And the reason why you make your cover a bit larger than your paper size is so that when your pages are folded, it doesn't hang out of your journal and get all frayed up. So you want the cover to sort of protect all the pages inside. And here I am just sort of going through various pages of magazines and papers that I have and cutting things more or less to the size that I want, but it doesn't actually have to be perfectly cut up yet. I really just want to know where I want to fold it. So like, because I'm thinking about this themed journal and picking certain imagery, I'm taking pages and folding them where I think I want the pages to be. And I, can cut to sort of trim them to size, or I can just fold it in half because I'm actually going to trim everything at the end. So as long as I fold it and I know that there's enough room, then I'm good to go to trim it at the very end when I have the entire stack, and I can trim it at that point. So there's definitely a lot of cute imagery, but sometimes it doesn't work out, or sometimes the paper might be a little bit smaller. And definitely you don't have to have all your pages the same size. I'm sure you've seen before in other junk journals or sort of mixed media type of journals, people will have different size papers, or they might include like an envelope or some other interesting tidbit into the pages of their journal. The only thing you need to remember is just where you fold it, which is where you're going to sew it into the cover. You just need to make sure that there's enough there for you to sew it in. Like if you wanted to add like a tiny strip of paper, that would be quite difficult because it means you probably could only sew in like one hole in a tiny strip, and that it would like move around and not be very sturdy. So you just have to make sure that whatever size paper you want to use, that it's going to be able to be sewn in and kept within your journal. And usually I try to keep everything the same size, or sometimes it might be a little bit shorter on the left and right side, but in terms of the center where I fold it, it's usually almost always there. I just find it easier because you can stack the papers and you don't have to worry about things shifting or getting mixed up, and it's sort of always going to be ready to go. So now that I have my stack of papers ready and I folded them up and I'm putting them in my journal to sort of see if I like the order or if I need to add more in between to create a flow of pages that I'm happy with, I just do a quick flip through even though nothing is attached yet, just to see if I like it. And you can see that my papers are all different sizes right now because I have not yet trimmed them. I've just folded them where I want them to fold just so that I could see how everything more or less is going to look like when I put it together. And now I'm going to use a self-healing cutting mat to trim all my pieces. I'm trimming the leather that is the journal cover with an X-Acto knife and a metal ruler, just following the pattern piece of paper that I already have to the proper size. And it's really easy to trim off the excess. And then I have my stack of papers, and I'm going to make sure that they are stacked up nicely and then trim that to size as well. And of course you would use your measurements or whatever size journal you are working on. For mine it's A6 size, so I have that white piece of paper in the front that is A6 so that I could use it sort of as a template to trim all of my papers. By the way, if you don't have leather to use as your journal cover, you can use any other material that you have in your stash that is just more sturdy. It has to be able to be folded over and not rip apart, so you probably wouldn't use paper unless it's like a stronger cardstock type of paper. You just want to make sure when you're folding it and using it as the cover, it's not going to rip apart. Or you can try gluing fabric onto cardstock or use canvas. Anything of that nature will be easy to use as one piece because you can fold it over to make it your journal cover. And once I'm trimming these papers in my journal, you can see that I'm slowly, lightly running the X-Acto knife across the papers to cut through all the layers, slowly but not like pushing really hard because it's not really necessary. And that will give me my signature that will fit in my journal. And I'm totally not precise when it comes to this kind of thing. I folded the papers, but I hadn't clipped them together, so the inside folded ones were sort of popped out a little more. So now you can see that they end up like sort of different sized at the edge, like slightly by millimeters. That's not something that really bothers me, but if you want to be really precise, obviously you should clip your papers together and like measure and trim just to make sure you get it exactly the way that you want it to be. It really depends on how precise you are. So once I have all my papers ready, I'm going to stick them into an old paper catalog so I can punch holes to easily sew my book together. I'm basically doing a simple pamphlet stitch, so for a journal this small 3 holes are going to be just fine. I want to make sure I punch holes large enough for whatever needle and thread I'm going to use, and I will do the same for my cover as well. And you just need to make sure that the holes you're punching into your paper obviously match up the holes that you are punching into your cover. You can measure it out, you can pre-mark it, or make a template and then punch through it. You just want to make sure you're not going to make a mistake, because when you sew this, when everything is pre-punched and lined up, it's just going to make the process a lot easier. And your book, your journal, is basically stronger if everything is more exact, rather than having like mismatched holes that are off, and then it means your thread that you're sewing through is going to be like exposed and weird, and that's just going to make your journal not as strong, because there's going to be more chance of it getting messed up, basically. So I'm using a mustard linen string that I actually got from the hardware store. It's not really anything fancy or anything. You definitely can buy specific book binding thread that is waxed so that it won't get caught in itself. But when you're sewing something as simple and small as this, you really don't need that, because there's less chance that it's going to get, like the string is going to get caught in itself. People who sew maybe like 8 or 10 signatures into one journal, you're going to have to make sure you don't get things caught, because you might be using like a couple meters of string. So in this case, it really doesn't matter. You just want to make sure you have a really strong type of string so that it won't break on you. So like if you pull on it, it shouldn't snap. If it snaps, it means that it's probably not strong enough to hold your book together. So right now I have clipped my pages together so they don't move around on me, and I'm using a very big needle to basically string the thread through, and I'm going like in and out each hole, back and forth, from one hole up to the next, and then back around. Really, really simple. It's just the pamphlet stitch, or like long, I think there's another name for it, but basically you can look this up online without problem. It's the simplest stitch that you can do. And really the only thing that matters is to decide where you want your knot to be. I have the tendency to always start from the bottom inside of my journal, and then I go out, then I come back in the middle, then I go out the top, then I come back in the middle, and then I tie my knot at the bottom. And it's just a personal preference. I like to have my knot there because it sort of tells me that that is the bottom of my journal, and I always like my knot with a little bit of tail but cut on the inside. But a lot of other people who do pamphlet stitches, they actually prefer to start from the middle outside, and in the end leave like a longer string and tie a bow on the outside. So it's really up to you. You can do it anywhere you want. And so that is how I make my handmade journals. and you definitely want to leave it under a heavy book or clip the edge if the pages are popping up, and you just have to give it a little time to flatten out. But let me show you how I made this little heart elastic as well, which is just a closure for my journal. It's sort of nice to have like a closure for your journal so things don't pop out, especially if you start to fill it up with a lot of things. And I wanted to use this really big elastic to make a decorated kind of elastic, but I was trying it for a while, then I realized that this elastic was just too thick for this particular case. So it's really simple to make a decorated elastic for your journal. I'm just using a piece of elastic that is measured out to fit around my journal, and I'm using 2 pieces of leather which are the same exact motif. I'm going to use one for the front and one for the back. And what I'm doing is punching a hole in the middle of the back piece. And the reason why it's in the middle is because that will make it so that it's balanced when I put the elastic over my journal, and the decoration won't be like folded or odd when you put it on your journal. Basically, it'll lay flat. So I'm stringing the elastic through this center, and I'm stringing both. So see how the elastic, the loop is on the outside, and then I'm gonna tie the knot in the inside, or the wrong side of this like little heart-shaped piece of leather. And what I'm doing is basically sandwiching my knot in the inside. And of course, since you punched a hole in this heart, you have to make sure like the knot is big enough and it's not gonna like fly out when you use this elastic. But once it's anchored in the middle of your motif, then I'm really just gluing the top part over it to sort of sandwich it in and make it really, really strong. And in this way, the elastic that comes out of the middle of this thing, of this decoration, this heart, it's going to lay flat and nice on my journal rather than like flopping around. If you try to put the elastic in a different way, I've just found that it doesn't work as well. So that's why I do it this way. And I'm just using regular white glue and really loading on the glue and making sure that I'm gluing like the knot and the whole piece properly on top of the shape. And I'm gonna let it dry like really, really well overnight, if not longer, to make sure that it's just really secure before you start using it. Because if it's not yet totally dry and ready and you start using it, then you might like pull it out of its place or just sort of like mess it up because it's not yet ready to be used. And that's how I create like a sort of decorated elastic. And you know, I've used a heart shape, but you can obviously use any kind of other shape that is more or less balanced, so that you can find a middle and put your elastic in there. So like a star, or some people obviously just have a regular square shape. And that's it. That is my A6 journal. I hope you enjoyed watching my process, and it might inspire you to make your own journal or junk journal so that you could start journaling or continue journaling. I really like making these smaller journals because I think it's a very good challenge for about a month to finish a little journal. And the elastic definitely helps to keep your journal more flat, and just any other materials you might put into it. Sometimes I keep something in my journal before I've glued it in yet, so the elastic really helps to keep it all together so I don't lose any pieces. And this is my A6 journal. Hope you enjoyed the process. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see more, subscribe to my channel. I post videos about journaling, printables, and all things paper crafting.